All right, so yeah, I have been up at the Castle Butte Lookout for the past 2.5 weeks. I came down yesterday. I went up there. My work is always very intimately connected with the environment and my time I spend out in wilderness and forest and just connecting with nature. And that's sometimes more overtly connected and sometimes not. I came up here with many things in progress that I knew I would make some headway on, working on, but also wanted to have time really responding to this time and place. So I came up here, strangely enough, with a stack full of science fiction to read. I'm going to be teaching a class this coming fall called Histories and Dreams of VR in VR. So I'm teaching about the history of the technology virtual reality, but both its actual history and its history through speculative fiction. And I'm doing that because it's really important in all of our day-to-day life to continue dreaming and continue there's like this potentiality that comes with speculative fiction. When we're dreaming about a future, it's in response to the now, but it's also shaping the actual future. I read a lot of science fiction in a lookout tower in the middle of nowhere. And at first, that felt comical and disconnected, and then like the connections really formed naturally while I was there. Like that separation, especially when I'm reading about VR, felt really natural. It's a very separating technology, but it also connects in different ways. And there's a bit of a dystopian line through a lot of the fiction. And there's something about the lookout tower that feels both utopian and dystopian. So yeah, this is just like, that's like the pile from when I was unloading things.
Can you define VR for anybody who may not be?
Oh yeah, virtual reality. Yeah, I should. Thank you. I'm bad about just like making big jumps in what I know. So the technology of VR is really about like replacing our experience, so like our sensory input, with something else. So I'm going to connect it all the way back to like Plato's allegory of the cave when I'm talking about the histories. But right now, it's the goggles you put on your face with screens right here and headphones, and you can move around the space and move around a virtual world. And it's being used in like comical ways all the time. So this is a quote from a writer, Adrienne Marie Brown, who, and this like really, I think I said these exact words or close to them already, but this is like really shaping a lot of my art making practice for quite some time recently, and my education, like how I function as an educator in my pedagogy. And it's that if we're shaping the future at all, if we're having an impact on the future, we are futurist. And futurist is a term that we often apply to people dreaming about going to Mars, or, you know, it's often these like grandiose things. But if we are having any impact in shaping the future, we are a futurist, and we should think about ourselves that way. So this is a pile of rusty nails. I spent a lot of time, especially when I was like first up there, like just spending time right around the lookout. I was going on hikes a lot, but like, and I was probably for the middle of it, like averaging close to 10 miles a day, just like hiking, just keeping myself busy, moving and exploring. But I still had a lot of time just right around the lookout. And the lookout is this place with like a really deep, long history. Like there's been multiple structures there. There's been lots of repairs. There are endless rusty nails just scattered up there. And it was this mindless thing I was doing. I was just like, while I was sitting out there reading or walking, thinking, listening to an audiobook, whatever I was doing, I was just picking up these rusty nails. And I felt at one point like teleported back to being a child growing up with family that ran a construction company. So I lived on a job site as a child. Like as a small kid, I was like told I had a job to pull nails out of scrap boards and straighten them. And it wasn't a real job, it was just to keep me busy. But I found myself doing the same thing. I was finding these nails and straightening them with a hammer that was in my truck. And wait for that. And then they became useful. Like the first windy night we had, one of the braces for the shutters had been broken a long time ago, and there was a sheet of plywood that was wedged into place instead. But the wind just kept knocking it down. So that first night it was windy, I was up every hour to put the plywood back. So the next day I was like, well, I got nails and a hammer, so I fixed it. And yeah, and then I started thinking about how these nails would fold into my work somehow. I was really fascinated by the shapes and the textures. So I work a lot with a lot of different digital technologies, virtual reality, all kinds of things. I started 3D scanning them. And that's a process where I'm taking, 50 to hundreds of photos of one object from all different angles, so then I can build like a digital copy of that. And that digital copy I can do anything with. I could start straightening those nails digitally if I wanted to, or I could 3D print them to make sculptures. I could create a video game that you might play in VR with nails. But like it was this practice that I was scanning them, just like collecting this like database of these shapes. But I also really like just the problem solving of figuring out how to go about some of this stuff. So when I'm thinking about a nail and needing to take photos from all different sides, I don't want the nail like laying on something. I want it standing up. And so I started thinking about that. The first one that I'd straightened was easy. I set it on my turntable and it went. But I was pretty bored by the straight one, so I wanted the bent nails. And I was like, oh, my first aid kit always has super glue in it. Cool, I'll just super glue it. But the CA glue, super glue, had some chemical reaction with the rust, so like it just started to melt my turntable instead of glue. I'm also bad at chemistry, so no clue what was going on, but I knew it wasn't gluing. And so then I was kind of frustrated and defeated at first. I was like, I had glue, but what am I gonna do now? And then it like just hit me that like that day on a hike, I put my hand in some pine pitch. And I was like, wait, no, I found a really cool shaped piece of pine pitch that's in my bag somewhere. And at first I just tried to like take a little glob of it and didn't really work too well. But I remembered at some point reading or hearing, or maybe I made this up in my head, but that I could melt pine pitch down and make a glue. So I didn't want to use my pot for that, but I had a spare spoon, so I like bit this spoon, so it really looked like I was like in this lookout doing hard drugs. But I was not, but I was melting pine pitch in a spoon to glue these nails up. So I started, and then that really allowed me to create this system that I could use my camera on my tripod and this turntable, but I really don't want to just be like sitting in this lookout all day scanning these things. So it was something I did as the sun would go down. Like when I started just hanging out in the lookout, and it's a process that I'm able to automate to some degree, to where like I get one nail set up, I start an app on my phone that turns the turntable, fires the cameras, then I make an adjustment, do it again. So I was able to like jump back and forth between that and reading, and so that was like this process I was doing. But I still, and this is just like my strange computer setup in the lookout, so like showing that tie of being quite remote but still like tied into my like digital tools, and how I can use those, and all of that felt so. At first I was like, why am I up here working on a computer? And then like it really allows me to think about these tools and technologies more critically when I'm like in a space where you could say they don't belong or they're not typical. It allows me to like really think critically about it. This is just kind of a sneak peek into like the whole setup. So I've got like my camera on a tripod, this turntable with lights. I took this photo earlier in the day just so you could kind of see, but I was typically doing this after dark. and then my computer's over there. Ignore all my dirty clothes. Yeah, it was just me up there. So I felt like it would be important to show you all what this looks like in the software, like how this like digital copy of something like takes shape. I haven't had time to make a video of the shaping of these nails or the other things I was scanning out there, but I've got one of a mushroom that I scanned a long time ago. This is a tasty morel. So all of those photos that I take I put them into this software and do what's called aligning the photos. So it ends up like if I take a spiral around, it aligns all the photos in this ring, and then it creates all the points that it finds in common in different photos. So it starts out building like this like just ghostly image of these dots. It's called sparse cloud. And then I can build a dense cloud with that. I can make adjustments to things. And then I can eventually end up with a solid 3D model that can be 3D printed or anything like that. I did bring one. This is a 3D scan of a cactus. It is not a peyote because that wouldn't be okay. And yeah, so on my hikes, I started there's a lot of burn area up there and a lot of different stages of regrowth from a burn. So I was spending a lot of time in those spaces. And those are spaces I spend time in a lot. I forage a lot of mushrooms. So I spend a lot of time in burn areas in the spring. And there's always just a deep emotional feeling I have when I'm in those spaces, especially the first year. Because I'm really hit by the destructive potential and power of nature. The fire is sometimes nature. But also the resilience and the life of the same space. The first time I was in a fresh burn space when there was a huge fruiting of morels, it feels magic. It feels unreal when it's a field of morels. So I started really responding to the shapes some of these trees took when they burnt, and they felt like monuments to that resilience and destructive power of nature. I also started realizing why the nails were fascinating me on another level. They look like the burnt trees. The rust texture, the shapes. I made this connection in my head before I was conscious of it, I think. So that's not a great photo, but there are just I'd hike through this space where most of the trees all look like that. They're all similar, and then there'd be one just really gnarly shape. So I was initially just dropping pins on my GPS app whenever I would find trees, so I wasn't lugging my camera around all the time. I tend to just go really light and fast most of the time. And then I would take, one day every few days where I'd take my camera and go revisit those trees that I dropped pins at and spend time 3D scanning those. And then now we're looking at what the 3D scanning of those trees kind of looks like in this same software. So all of these little squares, those are the photographs that I took. So you can kind of see that I made a couple rings around, and then I got up close and was taking different arcing photos, because I'm really just trying to capture as much information as I can of all of the different angles. And then it's probably really hard for everybody to see that. I should have thought about this. But this is the 3D model, the copy of that tree. Extremely detailed. It's really time consuming both to capture those photos, and then while I describe the process on the computer, sounds like click, click, click. It's really painstaking. But I find it really meditative in a strange way. This is an up close detail of that burn. This was a very flat piece where a tree had split and burnt. This was a 3D scan, so I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit. when we had that, there was a really gnarly storm that came through a week ago tomorrow, I think. I saw, or it was 2 weeks, I don't know when it was. 2 weeks? Yeah. That was a wild experience to be up there for that. But I saw 2 really close lightning strikes hit the trees. One of which lit up. I mean, they both burnt to some degree, but one I watched burn for days. And I really wanted to find the other tree, so I eventually found it. But this is a split from that where it burnt. And this scan is more flat than a lot of the others because I was really focusing on a section. So I'm going to be able to use this to create a pattern, like a texture, that I could apply to other objects. So I can make a 3D model of a teapot, let's say, and make it look like this burnt tree, like the texture could wrap around. I'm unsure where that's going to go yet, but it's going somewhere. So this is one of my hikes. This is on top of Bald Mountain, which is like one of the things that it's really prominent to see from the lookout, and that is me pointing back at the lookout, just to give a little perspective. This was a space I hiked to a couple times because I found like the meadow on Bald Mountain to be a really peaceful spot. I spent time up there reading, thinking, photographing, a lot of different things. And so this was the Tuesday before that storm. And this is the view from my lookout Wednesday evening. And that photo was from right up here. So like just low, and you probably can't see on here, but that tree is on fire. And that was a really, like, being up there for that storm was exhilarating. It was terrifying and humbling. Like, it was, I've seen trees that have been struck by lightning. I've seen them smoldering the next day, but I've not been there to witness, like, the entire lifespan of that. And it was a really, humbling, I think is probably the best word, to be up there during that storm. But at the same time, it had been smoky for, the whole time I'd been up there. I hadn't had like a really, really good view until like this moment. Like it was that, as soon as that storm passed and I saw this burning, then I started looking around and I could just see forever, and it was so beautiful. So this is my cup of pine pitch. I also noticed as I would melt that stuff down, not only did I get a glue I could use when it was hot and sticky, when it dried, it became really hard and clear and shiny and beautiful. It looks a lot like amber, which makes sense. So I kept collecting it, and while this is not something I could do in the lookout, I plan to take some of these 3D scans I've made and use those to make 3D prints and then cast them, or make molds out of silicone. And I'm going to try and cast them in pine pitch. No clue how that's going to work. But in theory, I'm not a material scientist, but I think I can make it work. So yeah, there's that. And now I'm going to kind of transition to like some other trains of thought that were happening while I was up there. Like I said, I was spending a lot of time reading science fiction up there. I read by a red light a lot at night, especially when I'm hiking or camping, because that doesn't impact your eye's ability to see in the dark as much. And I've always been fascinated by being outside in the dark. And like, since I was a really young child, I grew up in a really rural area, southern Ohio, edge of Appalachia, and I used to sneak out of the house to walk around through the woods and the creeks and fields a lot as a kid, like 9, 10 years old. And I was always fascinated by how you saw, like how your eyes work at night. And that's something that's just carried through like most of my life. I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but I'm going to leave it up there while I talk for a second. So there's this theory called the dark forest theory that is actually about space and extraterrestrial life. And it is essential, and this is an excerpt from The Dark Forest, which is a science fiction book. Three Body Problem is like the first book. Dark Forest is the sequel. It's also a pretty solid television series right now. I've got mixed feelings about the TV show that we can discuss later if you want, but it's okay. But this theory is that so there's I'm gonna forget, I just lost it. I think the Fremen. There's like a theory that there are so many galaxies out there that there has to be life. There just has to be intelligent life out there. Like statistically, there has to be. But then, like, why have we not had any, contact or whatever? And that's what the dark forest theory is explaining that. It's about how in the dark forest at night it's silent. That doesn't mean there's not life. It means that predators are there. That the silence is because everything out there is hunting one another. And it's kind of saying we're the only ones stupid enough to scream into the void. That's how I interpret it. But so I was revisiting this series, and I also just recently, I've got this book that I picked up 6 months or so ago that has really impacted my thinking and my teaching, called the Dark Forest Internet Anthology, or Anthology of the Internet. I should know that off the top of my head, and I don't. But it's a collection of writing applying this idea of the dark forest to the internet and like the terrible way the internet's impacting our lives now. That like we're being preyed on. Like it's about commodity. Like we've become a commodity. Like our attention is it's being farmed, and it's about, so this collection of short essays is about like how we can adapt to that and how we can create our cozy spaces, our cozy webs, our cozy forest spaces on the internet. It's things like group chats with friends, or like,
Pinterest.
non-algorithmic spaces where you're not being taken advantage of. So I've just been like thinking about this stuff a lot, and like I've had some really amazing moments teaching with it and whatnot. But I really started thinking back to what I was talking about, how we see different at night. Anybody spend much time outside in like the real dark without lights? You lose your vision in the center. Like right now, we sense a lot of color. We tend to focus in the center of our vision. Our peripheral is just there. Next time you're out looking at stars, find a really faint star and stare at it, and it disappears. And if you look next to it, it reappears. It's because where our rods and cones are in our eyes, our cones are centrally located. Our rods are spread around the side. Our rods sense light. They also are faster, so they sense movement more. That's part of what I've always been fascinated about, like walking at night, is like you have to like relax your eyes. You have to like let go of looking at things. And I love it. It feels so good. But it hit me when I was thinking about this dark forest and stuff that predator and prey animals see different. Predator animals are centrally focused and very detailed. Prey animals are peripheral and very fast. So it really made me realize that our vision, we're adapted to be predators in the daylight and prey at night. And like I couldn't actually find any writing about that. I've tried since I've been back. But it's something like I'm working with now. And so these illustrations of how different creatures see at night, and then pairing that with like how we see, and this is an illustration for like aviation training. I'm gonna redo these illustrations to better suit how I'm talking about this, but this is illustrating that like we, at night, we have a weak spot in the center of our eye, and we actually see better on the side. So I'd been doing some hiking at night while I was up there, but not a lot, until like these thoughts really hit me. And then the last night I was up there, I sat around, I read for a while, let it get really dark, which doesn't happen until really late up there. Like it just glows forever, like the sunset. And I think I left the lookout at like 11:30 and hiked till like 1:30, almost 2. No headlamp, just me. And I had this phone conversation with my friend, high school friend. I've known him like my whole life. He had randomly called me that day, and I was telling him about this, and he's like, don't you get scared? And my like intuitive answer was no, like not at all. I don't think so. And then when I was out there, I just kept thinking about that. Like he asked me if I was scared, and then I like really like paused and like measured myself, and I was like, I am scared. Like I am afraid, but it feels natural. And I think that was like, and then I realized that's part of what I liked. Like out there, I feel scared, but that feels natural and feels good. Like I'm in a space where I'm supposed to be afraid. I'm literally like my vision that I have evolved over however many years is set up to like detect like things. Like I'm in like the words I keep thinking about are that I'm no longer looking at things, I'm looking at the world around me. I'm seeing the world around me instead of the thing in front of me. So I'm starting to draw the connections on how I can apply that to both like the forest, the cosmos, and the internet. But those tendril, I'm not gonna like bore you all with these half-baked thoughts yet. Some of this is already half-baked. But I think on my drive out of the lookout, my drive here, I was started being like, why the hell did I like that as a kid? Like, I was like, that's strange. Like, so I was like, I couldn't, and then like, not to like get too deep, but I had a really traumatic childhood and like not a good home life. And I think I spent a lot of my childhood finding ways to not be at home or in the home. And I think subconsciously, the same reason I said earlier about the fear, I think I felt afraid when I was out there alone, but it felt like a space where I was supposed to be afraid. And I think I was drawn to that. I think I felt like prey a lot, and then to be out somewhere that felt like that's where I was supposed to be afraid and supposed to feel like prey, felt really good. So I don't know, like maybe I'm making huge jumps there, and I don't know what kind of work's going to come out of this yet. Might be writing. I've been writing about it a good bit. I'm thinking about how I could emulate this in virtual reality, but then that just feels wrong, but also really cool. So I know I'm going to start, I'm not an illustrator, but sometimes I am. I know I'm going to start reworking these illustrations to better fit how I want to write and talk about this. And then I'm going to leave you just with the last photo I took, which it looks brighter and happier on the screen. As I was like packing up and cleaning up the lookout, I saw another storm rolling in. So I sped up my loading of the truck because I really didn't want to do it in the rain. But it was also really beautiful to just watch that weather move in. And it got to the lookout as I was rounding the road to head down. I think I will leave it there. I'm happy to answer questions or elaborate on other things.
So lucky that was a lookout you could drive to.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it was. I went into it a little worried the way everybody talked about the road. It wasn't that bad. I off of 12, I take Forest Road 107 up to the 500, which is like the Lolo motorway, which was like really pleasant to drive. The motorway was, but the 2 miles from that up to the lookout was a little more intense, but it wasn't too bad. Yeah.
I'm really excited to see what comes out of this.
Thank you.
I mean, really interesting thoughts, and I feel really pulled into that with you.
Thank you.
I also want to know, did you have visitors very often?
Yes, like weekends, there was a lot of traffic with people out in like 4x4s. And that varied a lot. Like, I had one couple come up and spend some time up there who had worked lookouts a lot in the past. And I think that was probably my favorite conversations. It was interesting because like the group earlier in that day was like 7 Jeeps with like lifts and lights and like all the modifications, snorkels, and it was funny, like, and they were extremely pleasant people to talk to, but it was like their approach was like, and there was only one of those vehicles had more than one person in them, which was what like really was a gut punch for me. But the first gentleman like drove up the road that like loops around the lookout, like where I'm parked right there, is challenging. It's pretty steep, pretty ruddy, and there's a nice parking spot down below. But he had like come up, and then got out and was like scoping it all out, and then I just like poked my head out and said hi, asked him how he's doing. He's like, does this go round? Is it stable? Is it doable? I'm like, I did it in like my stock 96 Tacoma without thinking about it, but like, so it was just like this mindset was different. But then like, I don't know, he came up after they all made the loop, and like he runs a like off-roading like club, so he was teaching all these people like how to do that. So it was like really great. Like there were moments where I caught myself like jumping to conclusions about like, oh, you're just out here like, you know, conquering the world or whatever. Yeah. So it varied. The last Sunday I was up there, it was like quite busy. Like it was just like group after group after group. But through the week, saw very few people, if any.
I see a sci-fi screenplay coming.
I've actually always wanted to write a screenplay. Yeah.
With nails.
Yeah. Rusty nails.
Night vision.
I saw your hand in the back first.
I'm curious about the 3D scanning.
Mm-hmm.
Does that just involve software, or is it a combination of hardware and software?
So there's so many different ways to 3D scan, ranging from like $30,000 pieces of handheld equipment that you can 3D scan with, to a camera, a piece of paper, and a lot of time and math. I'm nowhere near that talented, but like I go in the middle, and I use software and a camera. For the most part, I've used some laser scanners and some structured light scanners and stuff that are more hardware dependent, but my background artistically and like education is photography and sculpture. So my day-to-day art making practice is no longer directly photography. I'm a very technically skilled photographer. So I can get really, really nerdy and nitpicky about how I'm capturing these photos to 3D scan. Like I've been commission's not the right word, but like pulled in to help 3D scan like difficult artifacts and stuff in the past, like just things that are either very delicate or have interesting surface textures that are, anything reflective is really challenging to scan. But to quickly answer your question, my method is software based. Yeah.
There's a saying basically, and it reminds me of your presentation, that everything in your life that you want, you don't look directly at it.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
in the light, it's already there.
Mhm.
So anyway, so maybe
Yes.
everything that you want to do with this is already there. You just can't look directly at it.
Absolutely, and I try and embrace that in life, and especially in my art making practice. My art making practice is always,
Yeah.
I'm doing like 7 things at once, like here, there, everywhere, and I just like kind of let things form organically between seemingly disparate techniques or thoughts or ideas. Yeah. You had your hand up.
Well, it was kind of on the line of what she was saying, and we were talking about, you know, in the dark,
Yeah.
how, you know, you have to concentrate on the outside. I actually live on an Indian reservation
Okay.
and have a lot of friends and have learned little things, but one of the little pieces of information I thought might set your brain kind of moving is that, no, here we go. There is I call it a shamanic
Mhm.
technique, where when you want to really be present during the daytime as well as the night, you do this very careful walking, where you watch where you put your feet and whatever, but what you're doing is at the same time, that's how they're quiet.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what you're doing is you're spreading your awareness out. You're actually not seeing, but you're focused ahead.
Mhm.
But you put your awareness out so far that you are able to pick up on the things that
Yes.
you don't normally see.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I could actually, my mind is going like, ooh, the nails.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
this is a way of, you're trying to feel what the nails feel, what, you know. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that, like, the way you described that almost perfectly dovetails into, like, a previous body of work that I was making that dealt with, I was using artificial intelligence to generate new camouflage patterns that I trained on, like, a history of camouflage. But it was I also was doing a lot 3D scanning mushrooms. And when I'm foraging, I feel like that is when I function like that, where if I am like, all right, gotta find a morel, gotta find lion's mane, gotta find whatever, it never happens. It's when I just let myself be in that space, and it's always like, and I find it fascinating because we should not be able to pick up the patterns of it. Like a morel mushroom especially if you're in an area with pine, like, you shouldn't see it. Like, it's perfectly camouflaged. And then the moment you find one, like, our brains are pattern recognition machines. That's what that's why we see faces and everything. And like the moment you like find one, it's like suddenly they're everywhere. And if you try and see them, you don't. But if you just be and like let yourself connect, they're yeah. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I'm curious, like you're an educator, you're about to head back to school, and I'm curious how a time at a place like this impacts, your role as a teacher.
Yeah, I am going to answer that in like a couple ways.
Okay.
I'm going to start by telling you all about the first half of my summer. For the last year and a half or so, a colleague of mine, June Sanders, and I had been planning a study abroad trip in Berlin. So I spent the first 4 weeks of the summer with 16 students, myself and June, in Berlin. Major city, amazing art scene, amazing culture, amazing phenomenal space. And I was there with, a dream group of students. But I had this built-in social group. So I was with people the whole time. And that's not super normal for me. Like, I'm fairly social, but I like my alone time.
In the dark.
Yeah. Yeah. So, in our last reflection on the trip and stuff, one of the questions that we circled around the group was what do you need after this? And I said, I need to go disappear in the mountains by myself for a while. So here we are. So in some ways, it was really healing and felt like recovery in a way from previous teaching, but it also really let me. I mean, a lot of my time up there was spent preparing for class, not writing a syllabus and stuff, but preparing my thoughts. And I talk a lot. I tell a lot of stories and stuff when I teach, so I'm sure I'm gonna be this is gonna saturate a lot of my conversations. Yeah, I hope I answered the question.
Thank you.
Okay, I have two quick questions.
Cool.
Let's see. Well, I don't know if this one's quick. One of them's quick. One of them is about can you make the connection? I found it really interesting how you used your body and experience as kind of an access point to your thoughts. I'm wondering about the connection between the technology. Like, how do you think about the role of technology as part of your sensing, thinking? Like, how do you wrap that into what you're thinking about? In a short, you know, that's a long conversation.
Would you repeat that question?
How does he wrap his ideas of technology into his sensory experience of, you know, for example, what he talked about of seeing in the dark and connecting that to his own experiences.
100%. Yeah. Well, and I think I'll start with, I think a lot of people fall on this like either like a techno-utopian or a techno like dystopian. Like, I think there's other terms that are more fitting than that maybe, but like they're either just like, you know, to hell with technology, let's get rid of it, like, you know, cell phones are the devil, or it's like it's gonna fix everything. I am adamantly opposed to both of those views. Tools can be used for good or evil. Atomic energy is like, that's the thing that's like always talked about, or like, there's so many different things that are like great. Like, I can build a house with a hammer, or I can do really violent things with a hammer. Like, any tool can be used for positive or negative. It's the intention behind how it's used. I like to think of myself as somebody that approaches most things I'm doing with a skepticism, a curiosity, and a criticality. So I think I value the curiosity the most out of that. But so with technology, I think of that as like ways of impacting my experiential experience of spaces, times, places. And often I think of it as a form of like an augmentation. And I think the most direct use of that is like the camera, the lens. I can use that for a lot of different things. I can take photographs that capture amounts of light that I can't with my eyes, or speeds that I can't freeze in my mind, and like quite literally a photograph allows you to like transport to a different time. Like, it allows me to revisit something. My memory is terrible. So like, if it was not for being able to snap photos all the time of things, like my experiential experience of a lot of things would be much more limited. I spend a lot of time after these hikes, like going back through, like what caught me enough to like spend time with it. And I try not to be somebody that's just like boom, boom, boom. Like, if I'm gonna take a picture of something while I'm doing that, it's like an intimate time. I'm gonna spend time. I've got like an ongoing series that's like kind of silly and kind of serious. When I'm hiking, when I come across mushrooms, like any kind of mushrooms, I take a video of myself like caressing and touching it, but like in like it's usually in like kind of a sensual way. And like, to me, it's like we need to connect with all of this stuff with our bodies. But this video is a way to like share that too. I feel like I sidestepped your question.
No, that's good. I think it's actually, I think, its own novel or something like that. It's not a quick question. Yeah. The other, which is quick, do you have any sci-fi book recommendations that came through from your time? Top recommendations from your stack?
Neuromancer is like one of my all-time favorites.
What is it again?
Neuromancer. It's William. Yeah, but I'm a fan of a lot of his writing, but I think it jumps in a similar way that my mind does. If you haven't noticed, my attention is all over the place. So like, I jump around a lot, and his writing does, so it like meshes up. I found myself, Snow Crash is another one that was written much later, and in some ways is like borderline satirical. of like the cyberpunk genre. And I found myself really enjoying that. Three Body Problems, great. Yeah. Those are the ones that are jumping at me right now.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you ever get the sense that you were the prey?
Yeah, like the whole time. Like
Especially at night.
well, yeah,
texting
to
the
me
lead.
that's like what felt good about being out. Like when I'm out in the dark at night, I feel like the prey, and like I feel afraid, but in a way that feels natural.
But you didn't have any wildlife encounters?
I saw a lot of tracks of bear, and I saw a couple cougar tracks. Not like when I was out at night, because I wasn't looking for tracks, but like in the areas I was. But to me, like that almost in some ways like really like solidifies some of that like dark forest. Like, you know, I didn't see them.
Yeah.
And I really actually saw less wildlife. I became friends with the chipmunks. Like they were just, yeah. And then like some crows that spent a lot of time around the lookout, stuff like that. Most mornings I saw a whitetail or two close. I saw like the butt of one elk. Didn't even get to see the whole elk.
Okay.
Yeah.
One last question.
Yeah.
I don't know, we're doing out of time, but anything that you wish you had brought with you that you didn't?
I mean, little things like glue, but not really. Like, I'm actually glad I didn't. There's things like that. I like those problem solving. A similar one that's like less flashy or fun. So I brought like a Jackery, like a solar rechargeable battery, and in my head I was like, cool. All I need to like power with that with like a wall plug is going to be to like charge my computer sometimes. Run that turntable and lights. Everything else is like battery, so I'll recharge. And the two plugs on that Jackery are really close together, and the plugs for those two things were really big, so I couldn't plug them in at the same time. And at first, like I was like, shit, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And like in my head, I was like, okay, this only needs 5 volts. I can like strip these out and like rewire a USB plug. And then I remembered that I had like a cigarette lighter to a 120 adapter like tucked in the glove box of my truck. So that ended up solving that, but I wish I would have just brought a little power strip. Like it just would have made that a little easier. Which like I've got a history of having to hack things like that. The first artist residency I ever did was in Finland in 2013, and I just got the first developer kit for Oculus, like the VR headset, like one of the very, very early, like semi-commercially available things. I was doing grad school, my MFA at the time, and the department had just got one, and you could check it out. So I was like, I had no clue what I was going to do with it yet. This was like me wetting my toes, or like, you know, really exploring that technology in a different way. So I checked it out and was like, I made like a virtual gallery exhibition in it while I was there, but I needed to power it from my laptop, and it had a plug for power, like from the wall, but the wall block said it was 5 volts. So I'm like, well, that's USB power. Like, and it had a USB plug, so I opened the whole thing up and saw that the USB port had nothing coming out of the power spots on the USB. Sorry if I'm being overly technical. So I was able to find a soldering iron and jump some little wires to where, but I never told the university. So like, so I just, because it still worked with the plug too. Like I made sure it was an either or, but I knew like the secret that you didn't need the plug. Yeah.
If anybody wants to also dip your toes into technology like 3D scanners or 3D printers, the Missoula Public Library has excellent resources. They're makerspace up there, and if you haven't been, it's free and available to the public. So they're one of our partners as well, and recommend checking them out if your curiosity is piqued. So.
Yeah, and I know artists that have worked in that space and like speak extremely highly of it.
They also have really, really good people there, because
Yes.
I'm not a makerspace
Exactly.
person, but I got all the direction I need
Yep.
to
They have
do it.
a technician
They
there
have
who
two
will
or
help
three,
walk you through it,
actually,
yep.
yeah.
That's to me what makes those spaces magical, because like it's one thing to have access to that technology, but if you don't have access to someone to like
To help you.
and
Yeah.
to learn it or to like troubleshoot,
Yeah.
it's useless.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank
Great,
you.
thank you,
Yeah.
Jacob.